Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2235. The topic is Q&A, and the title is Why Rep Range Does Matter for Muscle Growth. One of my clients is a personal trainer, and they had sent a couple social media videos that were discussing the appropriate rep range for muscle growth. And the current science-based culture seems to be pushing that really anything between, say, 5 to 30 reps is good for muscle growth, meaning you can be anywhere in there, everybody's going to be totally fine. So they were asking, is that really the case? That seems to be quite a large range, and they're extremely different experiences doing something at a 5 rep max versus a 30 rep max. And they wondered if that was the case, why in the programming I give them, why do I actually specify rep ranges? Because I usually give ranges sometimes and most often about a 4 rep range, so like 8 to 12 reps. Sometimes it'll be a little bigger, like 6 to 12, or maybe I want like 12 to 20. But I usually give a more specific range per exercise than just say, hey, lift anything between 5 to 30 reps. So is that true? And if so, why do I give a more specific range in programming? Great questions. Absolutely love it. So we talked this through, and I thought it would make a fun podcast. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the aspect of is anywhere between 5 to 30 beneficial. The answer to that, if we look at the just 1,000-foot view, is yes. Is if you do an exercise near good form failure, meaning right when your form is about to break, you stop. If you reach that point of intensity, we'll call that intensity, how intense the movement feels, is right on the edge of what you can do correctly. If you do that somewhere between 5 to 30 reps, then yes, you're going to get very similar, and the studies would argue, insignificant difference in muscle growth response. Now, in combination with that, there seems to be this current push in social media that low reps are best. And low reps are best because they limit quote-unquote junk volume, meaning doing a lot of reps that don't necessarily equate to that good form failure kind of intensity. So, for example, if I'm pushing something right to the edge of failure, why not just do that in 6 reps as opposed to 16 reps? So that's the current model is, low reps are best because it just requires less reps to get to the point you need to get to anyhow. Then also low reps are best because the other prevailing concept at the moment is that you have to have muscular tension to a significant degree for the body to believe that creating new muscle tissue is necessary. And the argument then is that higher reps don't create that muscular tension. So even though the research says 5 to 30 is totally fine, and those same people that tell you should just be doing low reps tell you that the higher end of that range is useless, and it's like, well, you're countering your own argument. And then the part I can't freaking stand is the people who seem to tout low reps. Not everybody, certainly not everybody, but it is a category, is that you're an idiot if you're not doing low reps. Like if you're doing anything over 10 reps, you're a moron. And it's kind of presented in that way. I hate when people do that, like negatively. I understand it gets more engagement, they get more comments, and they get a higher degree of people that agree with them, that they're zealots, and they'll comment and be like, yes, this is what I was telling everybody, da, 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 da. Or they'll get people who are like, you're an asshole. Yeah, and they'll put that in their comments, and it grows their algorithm, and it builds their channel. That's just, oh my gosh, I can't stand it. People care more about followers than they care about actually producing good content that I can actually help people. It's such a frustrating aspect of human nature for some humans and some of their nature. So what I wanted to do was say that in general, 5 to 30 reps, yes, as long as it's pushed to the intensity of right on the edge of failure. And there's nothing super special about low reps. You're not a moron if you're doing anything over 6 reps. And what I wanted to do is actually talk about the pros and cons of like low reps and high reps. So low reps I'm going to start with because that seems to be the one that people are pushing. But in my opinion, very intense efforts at very low reps has more negatives than it has positives. So let's go through that. Let's start with the pros. Let's start with the positives because I was being grumpy about people being negative. So I'm not going to start with the negatives. I'm going to start with the positives. The positives of low reps, and I'm going to define low reps as under 10 reps. Now, that's not actually, like most people think low is like, 5, 6, 7. 8 is considered high reps. I saw one advertisement where a guy's like, you should only be doing 6 to 8 reps. If you can do more than 8 reps, you should be doing weight load progressions. Otherwise, you're an idiot. So 6 to 8 reps, anything under 10, we'll qualify that as low. The benefits is you can, and you likely will, increase strength. And when you get stronger, that allows you to move heavier weights, and that allows you to increase your volume in your training. And volume is correlated with muscle growth. So if across 10 working sets in a workout, I can move 20% more weight than I used to, I will grow bigger muscles. So volume increases when it's the same amount of, like, say, working sets. So a volume increase via weight load used does correlate well with muscle growth being a determining, like an outcome associated. So as you get stronger and you maintain the same number of working sets and you're moving heavier and heavier weights, your weight load volume per workout will increase and therefore your muscles will get bigger. That is a clear association. So increasing strength is helpful and necessary. An extreme other side of this is if somebody's only ever doing high reps all the time, their strength gains would be dirt slow, if at all, and their volume per workout would be very small increases over long term, and therefore they're going to likely see less growth response. So having some progression of strength is important, as it does correlate well with long-term continuation of muscle growth. The other thing is that low reps do get rid of quote-unquote junk volume, meaning a lot of repetitions you have to do before you get to the repetitions that matter. That can be helpful because the less repetitions you have to do, you tend to burn less calories in those workouts, and then therefore you need less food in order to create growth. Often people struggle to grow because they struggle to be able to eat enough. So if you minimize the things you do that don't 100% contribute to muscle growth, then you're going to have more calories available to grow. This would be the same as saying, instead of walking up 5 flights of stairs, take the elevator. So if you decrease your daily step count from, say, 5,000 to 2,000, you are going to be then using less calories for daily activities. That's going to mean the calories are more available for muscle growth. So it would be similar to just changing lifestyle factors to create a caloric reduction in usage. That would be the same concept, and this is very micro application of it, and it's arguable whether it's even significant. But if I'm, instead of doing 15, 20 reps of everything, if I'm only doing 5, I'm cutting out 10 reps, and every single set I do, that could be less calories throughout the workout. So therefore, I have more food available to grow. So those are 2 benefits of low reps that I could see being a good case for why including low reps into your programming can be beneficial. The negatives, though, is an insanely high injury risk. The reason why is the appropriate intensity to elicit muscle growth as a response is right on the verge of what you can do with proper form. This then means that, okay, each set I do, I'm getting really close to possibly doing it incorrect. And doing a movement incorrect under a very heavy weight load can cause serious injury. You can get muscle tears. You can get connective tissue tear. You can have a lot of bad things happen when a very heavy weight is moved even subtly in an incorrect pathway. Whereas if you're doing a set of 15 to 20 reps, that weight load is way lower. If you do 1 or 2 reps a little bit off, maybe your technique does break down before you realize it, you're way less likely to get injured. So especially when somebody struggles to know how intense is intense enough, using lighter weight loads is safer. Now, you might think that's only for beginners. So once you're not a beginner, you can then use really heavy weight safely. Bullshit. Nope. You could almost argue that the inverse is true. I have a ton of clients who are beginners, and they'll stop a set, and I'm like, why did you stop there? And they're like, well, I could feel, I wasn't doing it right. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. That looked no different than the first couple reps. So they're just uncertain. They don't have great confidence. So they don't know kind of what's right or wrong. So they just quit early because they assume they're doing it wrong. Then I have advanced athletes, 10 plus years of training, and I'll say, hey, I want you to go to good form failure. And then they just go to absolute failure where they can't even perform a rep. And I'm like, what are you doing? Good form failure means when good form fails, not when you just die under the weight. So I don't want you to go to absolute failure. I want you to go near it. And they'll go, for example, bench press, and they grind a rep, and then you'll see them attempt the next one. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? You barely got that previous one. And they're like, well, I thought I could do it. And I'm like, how? How did you think that you barely got a rep? Now I'm going to magically be able to get another rep, when I could barely do that one. So it isn't always the case to where beginners, overexert themselves and have bad technique, and advanced people know exactly what they're doing. Absolutely not the case. It can be any mixture of anyone screwing that up. So that is something to be mindful of, is if you yourself aren't 100% certain when your technique is breaking down or not breaking down, that would be a sign to stay a little bit away from really heavy weight loads in those specific movements. So if you have a hard time knowing if your squat technique is good or not, or when is it close to failure versus actually failing, if you're uncertain, do not do a 5 rep max. Lighten the weight load a little bit, maybe do sets of 8 to 12. Give yourself some leniency and allowance for maybe 1 rep is kind of off, but you're not going to get immediately injured because the weight load is so freaking heavy that it would risk the injury. Another thing is with heavy weights, you will start to develop and grow stabilizing muscles. A good example of this would be strongman competitors, and some powerlifters as well, but you'll clearly see it in strongman competitors, is the power belly. They'll have visible abs, but their belly is protruding, meaning it looks like a turtle shell. I remember watching when Stan Efferding, who is known to be the world's strongest bodybuilder, he was doing his powerlifting, aiming for powerlifting world records back in the day, and he was wearing this white shirt. I remember he was training at Mark Bell's Super Training Gym, at the original location, and he was wearing a white shirt doing squats, and you could see his ab bumps, his ab muscles through the shirt. That's how freaking lean the dude was. And I was just like, damn, I wish I could get that lean and be that crazy strong, squatting over 900 pounds. So it's holy cow. But it was a turtle shell. His belly protruded because it needed the abdominal wall, and the obliques needed to be so thick to stabilize his spine, his lumbar spine, to stabilize the middle of his body, that those muscles grew bigger and bigger and bigger to handle the weight load that was being asked of them. So they were doing essentially isometric contractions, meaning the muscles are contracting to prevent movement. And it was under such weight load, such intensity, that the muscles actually grew from those isometric contractions over time. So you'll see that when people lift very heavy, their stabilizing muscles do grow. Now, the degree in which, like our obliques, for example, can be thick is determined by our bone structure. So if somebody has very narrow hips, like the bones of their hips, their obliques might never get like massive in regards to like having their waist be as wide as their shoulders, but of what is available within their genetics, they're going to be at the extreme end of size-wise. So they're going to be thick in their obliques. And typically, if you're training for muscle growth, you would want to minimize your oblique growth because it helps taper in the midsection so your thighs and your shoulders and your back can look wider and bigger. So it's creating like an X frame. You have width at the top and the bottom, but narrowness in the middle. The heavier and heavier and heavier you lift, you're going to continue to thicken out that midsection. And for most people, they're not going to be happy with that type of development. The other thing is the heavier you lift, the less reps you do, the less you can mentally distinguish which muscles are doing what. So people who lift too heavy too often, and that's the majority of their lifting, they tend not to have good mind-muscle connection. They tend to just move weight rather than feeling which muscle is doing the moving and which muscles are stabilizing. This tends to lead to a very bulky, thick physique that isn't the typical aesthetic look that most people train for when they're training for muscle growth. And then the final negative I'll say about heavyweight is it's a greater CNS fatigue. You will absolutely feel more wrecked from lifting heavy weights than you will from doing high reps. This has some potential negative outcomes. Doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen, but it does have potential. So one potential is with the CNS feeling more wrecked, you're going to have sleep issues. A person will struggle to like stay asleep. They'll pass out, fall asleep for maybe an hour and a half, maybe 3 hours, so 1 or 2 sleep cycles, and then they'll just be wide awake for like an hour. And they'll just say, man, I was having such a hard time falling back asleep. And that can be due to the CNS being overstimulated. So the heavier a person lifts, the less often they have to lift, the less total number of working sets they have to lift. So that way they give their nervous system more time to recover. Then also, due to the nervous system fatigue, due to the systemic fatigue, they can potentially develop an over-reliance on caffeine. They're trying to then use caffeine to get through the day, and that can also cause sleep issues. And then another potential issue is due to the CNS fatigue. If they're not able to sleep more to give more time for the CNS to recover, and if they're not adjusting their training appropriately to train less frequency and less total volume, what happens is they have this fatigue, and they end up trying to out-eat the fatigue. So they'll eat more calories to try to get more energy when they actually just need sleep because it's the CNS that needs the recovery, and the CNS recovers best through sleep, not through food. So I will see this a lot in powerlifters, especially in female powerlifters, where they'll lift very heavy things. They have more of a CNS fatigue. They need to spend more time going to sleep. They need to get some extra sleep. But maybe they're not prioritizing their self-care, so they're not taking the time to actually sleep. They're over busy doing a million other things, so then they just eat more food to try to make up for the sleepiness, and they tend to gain body fat. Then when you ask them, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm lifting heavy, and heavy lifting made me bulky or heavy lifting made me fat. No, we overate. You needed to sleep an extra hour or 2 a day, not eat an extra 200, 400, 600 calories a day. So those potential issues with the CNS fatigue does not mean they're going to happen, but it does increase the likelihood that they could happen. And I see that all the time in clients. So it's something we have to mitigate and account for on a regular basis. So those are the pros and cons of low reps. Now, the entire time I've been basically poo-pooing on going too heavy, but also high reps have their own sets of pros and cons. So I'll define high reps as anything over 20 reps. So if you think of that range where, science says that 5 to 30 is okay, let's say 20 to 30 is high. That's high reps. The pros of high reps is less injury risk for sure. because you're not moving as heavy of weight loads. So even if you go really intense, you're less likely to get a muscle tear or a connective tissue tear. You might pull a muscle or strain a muscle, but you're less likely to have as severe damage to any tissues. Another pro is it's an increased opportunity to develop the mind-muscle connection. When you're using lighter weight loads, you can better distinguish between what muscles are doing the moving and what muscles are doing the stabilizing. You can then better focus in on the moving muscles, and that allows you to, over time, develop better mind-muscle connection. So high reps is really helpful to develop mind-muscle connection, which then you can apply to medium and low rep lifts once you have that development. The cons, though, the negatives to high reps, is you do have a higher caloric usage in your workouts. You're going to do just more overall reps. You're going to burn more overall calories. So if you're struggling to eat enough, this could, challenge that and make kind of double down on the problem. Is you're not eating enough and you're doing workouts that burn more calories than maybe you need. So that could be something to be aware of. And then also, if you're going lighter weight, higher reps, and you're also using like a slow tempo, you're going to be using very lightweight to the point that muscular tension is almost insignificant. So you're not going to get a great growth response because we're not lifting heavy enough, because the weight is so low and our tempo is so controlled, the weight load's too low to be useful. So I remember seeing someone in the gym one time doing skull crushers with 5-pound dumbbells, completely useless. Definitely not going to be enough mechanical tension on the muscles, so not going to help them grow. That would be an example where something is so controlled it's too light to be actually beneficial for growth. The recommendations that I use for clients is typically we tend to stay in the middle ranges. If I had to define that, I would say I'm often going to be between 8 to 20. 20 reps is usually say 14 to 20 is for warm-ups and smaller muscles, to where you're trying to isolate, say, the rear delt or the mid delt, but you don't want your traps to take over, you don't want your rhomboids to take over. So using a little bit of a lighter weight ensures that the assistance muscles don't over consume the stress. They don't get over involved. So sometimes higher reps are better to isolate smaller muscles. So that way, bigger muscles that could take the stress if we wanted them to, they don't feel the need to. And then low reps are helpful because sometimes you want the movement to be intense. You want the body to have that strength progression stimulus. So you do have to go a little bit heavier. And or they're movements that have a high aerobic demand. So for example, if I want someone to grow nice big legs and we're doing barbell squats, I'm probably not going to have them do sets of 16 to 20 unless they're insanely strong, like Tom Platz doing 500-pound squat for 20 reps. But if them doing 20 rep squats requires them to use 95 pounds, that's that case in which the mechanical tension is so low it's not really going to be helpful. So there is a give and take, a balance between using the low reps when it's appropriate, high reps when it's appropriate, but the majority of work should be somewhere in the middle. And that's going to give most people in most circumstances the best outcome is to have most of their training in that middle. So we'll think of it as a bell curve. Every now and then you're going to go to the low end. Every now and then you're going to go to the high end, but the bulk of the work is in the middle. Cool. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that was fun to just kind of hear. We hear in social media that 5 to 30 reps doesn't even matter what the hell you do. Then you hear some people say everything should be low reps or you're a moron. Not always the case. And that's usually not the case. Is extremes of anything are almost never the thing. It's almost always something in the middle is what is most helpful. If you have any questions, if you need any help with programming, we do offer one-on-one coaching where I write personalized programming specific to you, your needs, your schedule, your equipment. Everything is 100% personalized. You can learn more about that service on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. And you can always just email me if you have a question at brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people that know about it, the more people will be helped about it. And then if you like the podcast, you can consider donating to Supports Podcast. You can do a donation on our website, or you can buy your supplements from Nutricost.com. That's where I buy mine. You can use the code BrutalIron10 for a 10% discount. And whatever you spend, we get a 10% commission. So you get great supplements at a great discount, and you get back to a great cause. Okay, we can keep making the podcast, keep helping more people. If you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.